You're listening to Bible Thoughts, a podcast from Coram Deo Church. Bible Thoughts is all about taking small bites out of God's Word wherever you are and just chewing on them for a bit. My name is Rusten Harris. I'm your host. Thanks for listening. All right. Well, today we're continuing our time at looking at what the Bible has to say about work, labor, vocation, etc. And today we're going to be looking at the fourth commandment. That's going to be found in Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 to 11. Here we go. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male servant or your female servant or your livestock or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. All right. This commandment is often known as the commandment to rest, to keep the Sabbath day holy, and to cease from work and instead rest in the Lord. So some of you might be wondering, wait a minute, I thought this was this series was on what the Bible has to say about work, but this is all about rest. Well, that indeed is what the commandment teaches, but one of the things we don't often consider is that this is a command that has two parts. And it even is explicit in this passage of Exodus 20. It is a command to work, and it is a command to rest. And I want to spend some time considering, first, how the command roots our rest and our work in God's work and rest. And second, how the command shapes our approach to work. Okay, so first, how the command roots our rest and our work in God's work and rest. We saw last week when we looked at the dominion mandate that our work, our labor, our careers all flow out of the fact that God made us in his image and that we have been given dominion over creation as God's stewards. God has ultimate dominion over all of creation, and yet he has placed us in a place of dominion over the works of his hands. Just like God is the source of light in the creation story, and then on the fourth day, after he's already said, "Let there be light," on the fourth day, God delegates the rule of light to the sun and the moon and the stars. So, as we follow God in working out the dominion mandate, we are to reflect his good and righteous rule. We see a similar renewal of that original plan for humanity in this fourth commandment. This commandment tells us that the reason we are to work 6 days and then rest on the seventh is because in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and then rested on the seventh day. Notice the rationale for this commandment. Our work and rest is rooted in how God revealed himself as creator. God worked 6 days, and so we are to work 6 days as well. God rested on the seventh day, and so too we are to rest. This means we are not to work simply out of mere material necessity. We are to approach our work as the working out of being the image bearers of God. And this means that our work, just like our rest, has a profound dignity because it reflects God's character. And this is so important to know because it's all too easy to have a pessimistic understanding of work as being like a necessary evil. And it's also easy for us to have a view of certain kinds of work that to us seem beneath us. I'm thinking of there are certain things that people think are low work. I'm thinking about the garbage man or the plumber who has to get and work into gross situations. All of these forms of work which are not an act of rebellion to God, like there are some jobs I'm sure you can imagine which are actually in rebellion to God, but all work that is not in active rebellion to God is a dignified thing for us to participate in. It is a dignified thing. So there's no real such thing as work that is beneath us so long as that work is a fulfilling of the dominion mandate and a fulfilling of being made in the image of God. And out of that same mindset, we tend to idolize leisure. It reminds me of that song, "Everybody's Working for the Weekend." We don't work for the weekend. Our work is supposed to flow out of the God who gives us dignified work and who also gives us holy rest. This not only shapes our approach to work, it also corrects the way we might be prone to thinking that real happiness is a life full of leisure, or the goal of happiness, or the real happiness is just retiring and not ever working. God is the most happy person. He is the definition of blessedness, and yet God works. This is especially important as we consider ways in which we might love and bless our neighbors who are poor. Often we think that kindness toward the poor should intentionally de-emphasize or not emphasize that what the poor often need more than most things is to learn to work and to find suitable labor. Now, not every person who is poor is able to do that, but that is calling them and giving them the gift of the dignity of work when we call them into the work that God made us for. And when we do contrary to that, we actually end up undercutting the way that God made us. So for those of you who are able to give jobs to folks, you are in a place where you can be a God-honoring blessing to the poor. Also, when we say that our labor and rest is rooted in God's labor and rest, we're also saying that our work is rooted in God's lordship. And that was the point of God's rest. The creation story tells this sequence of events of God creating the heavens and the earth, and it's almost told like a story telling the procession of a king. The creation days build just like a procession builds in glory, and then the seventh day climaxes with the king resting upon his throne. God's rest is a declaration over all of creation that he is the king who sits on the throne. And this is also why man is the last of the things that God creates. He's the one who God gives dominion to. So again, our work, our labor, and our rest are rooted in the image of God. Okay, second, how the command shapes our approach to work. The rest that we are commanded to take limits our time for work. What this means is that our work is not supposed to take up every single day. If it did, our work would have a kind of ultimate hold over our life. But instead, we are told explicitly to limit our work so that we can rest. Now, one ditch we fall into, I already mentioned, that's the idolatry of leisure. Another ditch that we can fall into is the idolatry of work. We are not to idolize profit, career, or productivity to the extent that we do not rest. God, with this command, combats our tendency to think that we are ultimate in our life and that we are ultimately the Lord of our lives. When we want to make our life all about our career, what we're really saying is that we want to be Lord of our life. If we are told to rest in the Lord on the Sabbath, it means we are to trust that he is Lord, that he's in control. And he is so in control that we do not need to work every day of the week to provide for our needs. And knowing this, treasuring this, living in light of this is a guard against those of us who are prone to becoming slaves to our careers. This is a criticism of the life that is lived so wrapped up in our job that we never take a break and we never spend time with our family. This command to rest is a command to live as free men rather than slaves to our careers. Indeed, actually, when we look at the reiteration of this command in the book of Deuteronomy, another rationale given for it besides imitating God's 6 days of work and 1 day of rest is because God rescued his people from being slaves. We read, "You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. We are not to approach our work as slaves anymore, but as those who live in the rest of belonging to the household of God. Slaves don't get a break. Slaves work and work and work. That's all they are good for. There's a book by a guy named Andrew Peterson where he talks about this. There's a scene in the book. It's a kind of a young adult child book. And there's this terrible scene where this main character gets taken into what's called the fork factory, and they no longer refer to people as people anymore. They refer to them as tools. These people in this fork factory, all the people that are stuck in there making forks for this cruel slave master, are called tools. And that is exactly what happens when we look at our life as being defined ultimately by our work. We become dehumanized. We dehumanize ourselves because we're made in the image of God. We're made to reflect him through our work, but not become slavishly servile. We're supposed to reflect him in our work and our rest, which is trusting upon his rule and his goodness. And this actually has major implications upon how we as Christians employ people. In fact, in Deuteronomy, it explicitly states that all the servants also need to rest. It is hypocritical to be an employer who believes that God is Lord and that he has made us to not slavishly approach our work, to then treat your employees as though they should still treat their work as though they were slaves, as though they were tools. This means we should aim to give people jobs in a way that allows them to rest as well. Now, with that said, in closing, remember, God commands us things that are good for us. He made us, and we should listen to him. So when you consider work and the work that's before you, remember, God made you for this kind of labor, but he did not make you merely as a tool. He made you to rest in him. He made you to reflect him in your creativity and in your labor, but he was also you were not made ultimately for work. You were made for him. So consider your work in light of his goodness. Thanks for hanging out again as we explore Bible thoughts and consider work. Until next time, keep chewing on the word.